Hey everybody, this is John for Pioneer Nexus MTG coming at you with another deck guide. This is another one of those decks that's been kind of around the fringes of the format and just kind of exploded, much like Angels has done before it and a few other decks, and that is Dimir Rogues. Now Rogues has always been an archetype that's existed for several years, kind of since the printing of Zendikar Rising gave you a bunch of, Thieves Guild Enforcers out of M21. You had Soaring Thought Thief, and you also had access to Kaito in recent months. But it's kind of lacked that final piece to have enough playable rogues to make enough of a difference. Now, it did used to run Merfolk Windrobber, which was kind of a low-impact 1-1 that whenever it hit an opponent would, mill a card, and you could sack it if you had so many cards in your graveyard to draw a card. And then when Lurrus was a thing, obviously this deck benefited greatly from having access to that because all of your threats were able to be recurred that way. And then in the historic format, it also had the card Brainstorm and was one of the reasons Brainstorm actually got banned. This deck, kind of in the ilk of Delver or Death Shadow and some of the other Eternal formats. This is very much a tempo-based deck. Get your early threats down, Thieves Guild Enforcer, Soaring Thought Thief, Fairy Mastermind, Brazen Borrower. Just kind of pressure the opponent out while you're disrupting them. You have obviously the excellent disruption package that Black has had access to with Thoughtseize and Fatal Push. And then you supplement that with things like Drown the Lock, which is a good hybrid removal spell and a counter spell along with Spell Pierce. You also have Go for the Throat, Sheoldred's Edict to deal with various threats. Kaito is kind of your mid-game, allowing you to play a bunch of ninjas, while also, kind of cycling through your deck. And if you're attacking, you're also drawing cards without looting. So this is actually quite a nice thing. And if you're doing your job, generally speaking, your opponent's going to struggle to counterattack Kaito as they're under a lot of pressure and disruption as it is. So this kind of avalanches the advantage. And then finally, you get to cap it off with your mill sub-theme with Into the Story. This is a draw 4 for 7 mana that if your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, it instead costs 3 mana less, turning it into a 3 double blue for draw 4 and instant speed. Now, speaking of this mill sub theme, you have Thieves Guild Enforcer. Whenever it or another rogue comes on the battlefield, each opponent mills 2 cards. Then Soaring Thought Thief, whenever a rogue attacks, each opponent mills 2 cards. So obviously very good. You're generally not going to mill your opponent out, but it does kind of give you a backup win con if your opponent has some type of absurd life gain strategy, but mainly you're just a tempo deck seeking to get your opponent dead. The rest of the deck, you have Nighthawk Scavenger, very good in racing situations. One of the things this deck can kind of struggle with a little bit historically is decks that can go under it. So, decks like Mono Red Burn, decks like Might Humans, etc. just can kind of outpace your ability to remove them from the battlefield. They're a little bit more efficient than you are, so having a card that gains a bunch of life and in racing situations is quite nice. Then Agadeem's Awakening, nice way to rebuy a couple of your rogues in the mid to late game. Land-based, nothing too special. 1 copy of Castle Lockdwayne, whole bunch of red-black or blue-black duels, along with Hive of the Eye Tyrant and Otawaru as different ways to get advantage from your land base. Sideboard is an interesting one. You have a couple copies of Unlicensed Hearst. This is obviously very good against Greasefang, various Izzet decks, etc. Invasion of Amon Kahet. Whenever it enters the battlefield, each opponent mills 3 cards. Then each player discards a card. Each opponent discards a card and you draw a card. Then, if you happen to kill it, you may have Lazotep enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature in a graveyard except it's a 4/4 black zombie and should do its other colors. This can be quite nice in kind of the grindier matchups, forcing your opponent. Very similar to, I'm trying to think of the card. It was 1 black and a blue. It was an enchantment that would come into play. Each opponent would discard a card, you'd draw a card, and when you'd surveil, it would come back to your hand. Very similar to that effect with a reasonable thing on the backside if you happen to kill it. 5 mana Sheoldred, never enters the battlefield. Your opponent sacrifices a non-token creature, and then you can exile or return to the battlefield as a enchantment. For each opponent, destroy up to 1 target creature or planeswalker that player controls. Each opponent discards 3 cards, then mills 3 cards, and then puts all creatures from all graveyards on the battlefield under your control. Exile 2 scriptures and return it to the battlefield. Quite a powerful effect. Some of the other variants have more traditional Shouldred in the main deck. We'll talk about that in a second. Ray of Enfeeblement, this is primarily here for any type of white nonsense, so Angels, Greasefang, Humans, Duress when you need a little bit more disruption against control, or combo like Lotus Field combo. Negate, Mystical Dispute, obviously this allows you to fight over the blue decks, whether it be creativity or blue-white control. And we have one more version to look at that's just a little bit different than what this deck offers. So the one version we were talking about was a little bit more of a flash version. Now this version still has a lot of the flash sub thing going on, so not a ton different. But the one big difference, number one, your land count's roughly about the same, but instead of End of the Story, we're running Shouldred. Now, End of the Story is a great kind of over-the-top restore, kind of catch you up on card advantage, etc. kind of card, if you ever get that moment to refill. Shouldred can just come over and take over the battlefield, and your opponent's already had to exhaust resources dealing with your early Thieves Guild Enforcer, your Fairy Mastermind, your Soaring Thought Thief, now your Brazen Borrowers, your Nighthawk Scavengers. So oftentimes, much like Rakdos, there may not be a whole lot of removal spells left in the chamber to deal with a 4/5 that your opponent's losing life as they're drawing cards, you're gaining life as you're drawing cards. It's a big butt against aggro, it's also gaining you life. Shouldred just kind of feels like it fits into what the big problem with the deck was. The rest of the main deck, not a whole lot different. You still have that same disruption package. And Kaito kind of holding it down. Nighthawk Scavengers moved to the main deck. This version feels a little bit more tighter than the other one, but still doing a lot of the same things except for Shouldred instead of Into the Story. Sideboard, seeing a lot of the same things. Weathered Runestone kind of in the same place as the copies of Unlicensed Hearse, just as a way to shut things down in the graveyard. Safe and Insight, card advantage in the grindier matchups. Gonti, very much the same thing, kind of grindy in those grindy matchups. Ray of Enfeeblement, once again, same matchups as last time. Angels, Humans, Greasefang, Cling to Dust, very good against graveyard-based decks, plays with your instant speed strategy. Mystical Dispute also plays nicely against blue decks. Disdainful Stroke, good against big mana. Good against blue-white control, good against Lotus Field combo, good against mono green. And finally, Ether Gust, mono green, kind of locked in on the radar there, but can also be good against Rakdos, buying you some amount of time against a lot of their threats. Now, as I said, historically these decks have kind of struggled against decks with plethora of removal that play the same mid-range game they do, just a little bit bigger. They tend to be very good against blue-white X control. They tend to be very good against decks like Lotus Field combo that would probably also extend to something like mono green. You have to have obviously a very specific set of draws against mono green, because mono green can just kind of snowball out of control. So you're probably much like Rakdos in that matchup. You're a little bit of a dog, but with counter spells and stuff in the post-board games, that probably gets to be a lot better. Aggro decks can go a little bit under you, but you see a lot of tools like Ray of Enfeeblement and Shouldred to buy you a lot of time. So I'm very interested to see how this deck progresses, whether it will actually become a part of the meta, or if this is just kind of a flash in the pan because of very mastermind people finally experimenting with the deck. When it comes to our top 5, they'll be coming out either before or after this video, I'm not sure. This deck will probably be an honorable mention, as it doesn't have enough of a track record yet to be in the top 5 of the format, but it's certainly a deck much like Angels, Girl Midrange, and those kind of decks before it that's kind of risen and has certainly shook up the format a little bit. We'll see how the deck really progresses in the long term. If you like Pioneer content, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I hope to see you for our next video.